Admiral Zephyros of the Calaxian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Pride, watching the pathetic human fleet through the view screen with undisguised amusement. The alien's 4 eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction as he observed the ragtag collection of vessels that humanity had dared to bring against the might of the Empire. "Look at those primitive contraptions," he hissed to his tactical officer, his serpentine tongue flicking between razor-sharp teeth. Held together with metal rivets in desperation. How quaint. The human ships were indeed a sorry sight compared to the sleek, crystalline vessels of the Calaxian Armada, where the Empire's ships flowed like liquid mercury through space, powered by exotic matter cores and protected by energy shields that bent light itself. The human fleet looked like something cobbled together in a scrapyard, bulky angular hulls covered in crude armor plating, primitive fusion drives belching visible exhaust, and weapon systems that looked barely more advanced than projectile cannons. "They call this a fleet?" Lieutenant Cyrax chittered, mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among the insectoid bridge crew. "Our scouts reported these humans had some sort of technological advantage. This looks like a collection of mining barges." Admiral Zephyros had to agree. Intelligence reports from the Outer Rim territories had spoken of human ships performing impossible maneuvers, of vessels that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. He'd expected some sort of advanced propulsion system, perhaps even crude, attempts at dimensional manipulation. Instead, he found himself facing what appeared to be the naval equivalent of stone knives and bear skins. "Signal the fleet," Zephyros commanded, settling back into his command throne. "Standard formation. We'll end this quickly and move on to the real conquest of their homeworld." The Calaxian Armada spread out in perfect formation, 300 vessels of varying classes, from nimble corvettes to massive dreadnoughts, each one a masterpiece of engineering that represented millennia of technological advancement. Their energy shields shimmered like aurora as they powered up weapon systems that could crack moons. But then, something unexpected happened. A single human ship broke away from their formation, a small, battered-looking craft that seemed held together more by prayer than proper engineering. It accelerated toward the Calaxian fleet alone. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, confusion evident in his translated voice. "One of their vessels is approaching. Should we target it?" Zephyros laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Let it come. I want to see what these primitives think they can accomplish." The lone human ship continued its suicidal charge, growing larger on the screens. As it approached, the details became clearer: scorched hull plating, visible weld marks where repairs had been made, and what looked suspiciously like duct tape holding some external components in place. The vessel was designated UES Defiance, according to their scanners, and it appeared to be some sort of modified fighter bomber. "Primitive chemical thrusters," the science officer reported with disdain. "Crude nuclear fusion for power, kinetic projectile weapons. Admiral, this vessel poses no threat to even our smallest escort ships." But Captain Sarah Chen, piloting the Defiance through the void between fleets, wasn't relying on advanced technology. She was relying on something the Calaxian Empire had never encountered: pure human audacity, mixed with skills honed through generations of improvisation, desperation, and the absolute refusal to give up. As the Defiance entered weapon range of the Calaxian picket ships, something extraordinary began to happen. The human vessel didn't behave like any ship the Empire had ever encountered. Where their computer-controlled vessels moved in precise, predictable patterns optimized by artificial intelligence, the Defiance danced. It rolled, dove, and twisted through three-dimensional space in patterns that seemed to violate physics itself. Plasma bolts that should have vaporized the small craft passed harmlessly through spaces the ship had occupied microseconds before. The Defiance weaved between the gaps in overlapping fire patterns with precision that no computer could calculate. "How is it moving like that?" Cyrax demanded, watching in growing alarm as the human ship somehow threaded the needle between 6 converging energy beams. What they didn't understand was that Sarah Chen wasn't thinking about physics or optimal flight paths. She was feeling her way through the battle, reading the micro-movements of enemy ships, sensing the rhythm of their firing patterns and trusting in instincts that had been evolved over millions of years of survival on a hostile planet. The Defiance's weapons were indeed primitive by Calaxian standards, simple kinetic railguns firing solid projectiles at relativistic speeds. But what the Empire hadn't accounted for was the human understanding of physics as a weapon itself. Chen's shots weren't aimed where the enemy ships were, but where they would be, calculated not by computer but by intuition, honed through countless hours of three-dimensional combat simulation. Her first shot punched through the shields of a Calaxian corvette, not because it was powerful enough to overload them, but because it hit at the exact moment when the shield generators were cycling, exploiting a microsecond vulnerability that only existed in theory. The corvette exploded in a brilliant flash. Impossible, Zephyros breathed, watching as the primitive human craft somehow slipped past another barrage of fire that should have reduced it to atoms. But Chen was just getting started. She dove toward the heart of the Calaxian formation, her ship's crude fusion drive pushed far beyond safe operational parameters. The Defiance glowed cherry red from atmospheric friction as she skimmed the upper hull of a destroyer, using its own mass as a gravitational slingshot to accelerate toward the next target. The Empire's ships, for all their technological sophistication, were designed around predictable, calculated warfare. They had powerful shields, devastating weapons, and AI-controlled systems that could process thousands of targeting solutions per second. What they didn't have was the ability to adapt to something completely outside their programming. A single human pilot who fought not with technology, but with improvisation, intuition, and the kind of desperate creativity that only came from a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of the food chain. Ship after ship fell to the Defiance's impossible assault. Chen used debris from destroyed vessels as cover, bounced shots off asteroid fragments to hit ships from unexpected angles, and at one point actually rammed through a frigate's bridge section, using her ship's crude armor to survive what should have been mutual destruction. The Calaxian formation began to collapse as ships turned to pursue the lone human craft, their perfect battle order dissolving into chaos as they tried to track a target that seemed to exist in 4 dimensions simultaneously. All ships, concentrate. Fire! Zephyros roared, his composure finally cracking. Destroy that vessel at any cost! But it was too late. Chen had done what she'd set out to do. Prove that sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe was no match for a human being who simply refused to lose. As the Calaxian fleet turned inward on itself in increasingly desperate attempts to stop the Defiance, the rest of the human fleet struck. Those primitive ships that had looked so pathetic suddenly didn't seem so harmless when they were firing coordinated volleys into the rear sections of vessels that had turned to chase. One impossible pilot. The human fleet might have been crude, but it was also resilient, adaptable and crewed by beings who had learned to make do with whatever tools they had. As the Dominion's pride shuddered under impact from human railgun fire, Admiral Zephyros finally understood what their intelligence reports had been trying to tell them. It wasn't that humans had superior technology, it was that they had something far more dangerous. They had the absolute, unshakable belief that any problem could be solved if you just had the audacity to try hard enough. The battle turned into a rout. The Empire had brought overwhelming technological superiority to the fight, but humanity had brought something that no amount of advanced engineering could replicate: the willingness to take impossible risks for the sake of protecting what they loved. And in the cold vacuum of space, as the last Calaxian vessel retreated into hyperspace, Captain Sarah Chen guided the battered Defiance back toward the human fleet, her ship held together by determination and maybe just a little bit of duct tape, proving, once again, that sometimes the best technology was simply the refusal to give up.